Welcome, everyone. This is day 2 of our C2C conference. We call it C2C squared, and you should too. So today we are starting with a second keynote. Today is the community keynote. As I said yesterday, this Classroom to Community will become our organizational name because not only is it a better reflection of who we are, but it also gives a sense of how we do what we do. We think of going from classroom to the community. We think of our classroom as being part of the community and part of the challenges it faces. Today's keynote, we have the amazing Dr. Timothy Summers. As you're going to see in a second, he straddles, I think, a really nice 2 sectors for us. He's on one side, he's an educator. On the other side, he's a technology creator. And one of the reasons that I really love talking to Tim, and I think you're going to love hearing from him, is that in addition to that, I think he also he brings all of it together under a guise of social justice. I think one of the mistakes we make in adult ed is we don't think enough about technology and the role it can play to help bridge not only the digital divide that we all talk about, but the opportunity gap. You go into a McDonald's nowadays, and you can see workers that used to stand there and take your order are being displaced by a large screen. That means 2 things, that even to order your very basic meal, you need to have a basic understanding of how screens work. And if you think about it, those people got displaced because they don't have a job because they could be replaced by a computer. It tells you 2 things right there. Everyone needs to get involved in the digital world. We are in a digital world. I'll let Tim talk about that better than I. He's creating some of what we'll call the new world, especially for our learners in the way of badging. So it's fantastic. But just to get you all thinking, that's why we think it's really important to start our second day with someone talking about technology. Beyond that, I do want to say a couple of things just to remind you, if you're watching online, as you go at 10 o'clock to the workshops, please make sure you're doing surveys for every activity at the end. It should pop up in your chat. And if you're in person, the same, you'll have, there's QR codes in your room and you can scan it. And now with that, that's the quotidian. We'll get that out of the way. Now for the sublime. I'm going to give it away to Dr. Tim Summers. And please tell us a little bit about yourself and give us some wisdom.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Gabe. I'm going to share my screen, and I will tell you a little bit here about myself and kind of what we're doing here today. First and foremost, I want to thank Gabe and his team for just really bringing us all together. It's 6 a.m. here in Phoenix, but I can't think of anywhere else I'd rather be than here with you. And I want to start really here. It really is an honor and a pleasure to be with so many passionate and dedicated professionals who are ready and willing, just as I am, to make an impact on this world through learning and education. I'm an advocate for the lifelong learner, those that are constantly seeking out new information and new experiences. I believe that learning is a lifelong process, and that we never stop growing and expanding our horizons. Learning is a way of life. It's something to be enjoyed and valued, and it's definitely the way that I've always thought of it. Where I come from, we say that, it takes a village to raise a child. Well, my village brought me up to value learning pretty deeply, and it's something I plan to do for the rest of my life, really. So in 1980, Jet Magazine published a really shocking article. For those of you unfamiliar, Jet was a magazine focused on news, culture, and entertainment related to the African-American community. And in this particular issue, there was an article entitled, "Didn't Look Like a Doctor, So She Was Arrested on Drug Charges in Mississippi." The article told the story of Dr. Gloria Freelix, a Black woman who was mistaken for a drug dealer and arrested while trying to help a sick patient. The story caused outrage among readers who saw it as yet another example of the racism and discrimination in America faced by minorities on a daily basis. I'll read you an excerpt from the article. A Jackson, Mississippi police officer said Dr. Gloria Felix didn't look like a doctor, so he arrested her on charges of false pretense and possession of a controlled substance when she picked up a prescription at a drugstore for a patient. Dr. Felix had called in the prescription and given her identification confirming her status. When she reached for the bag containing the medication, a policeman who had been standing beside her placed her under arrest. Dr. Felix reported being interrogated by 3 detectives, one of whom urged her to tell the truth. You know, you're not a doctor, so I don't know why you don't stop all of this and tell us the truth. Her attorney, Stella Terrell, along with the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, had to convince the jail officials that Dr. Felix was indeed a doctor. And her attorney went on to say, no, she didn't look like a doctor. And I don't look like a lawyer. And you don't look like a social worker. We're all Black women with Black skin. How is a doctor supposed to look? That woman, the doctor that was arrested because she didn't look like a doctor, her name is Dr. Gloria Felix, and she is my mother. Like many, I learned from the trials and tribulations of those that came before me, standing on the shoulders of giants, as it were. My mother's story is just one example of injustice and inequity that we've seen repeatedly in our society, where people have been judged but weren't and haven't been considered for their true skills and abilities. Now, my journey wasn't a straight line. When I was a child, I had an educator tell me that I would never be as intelligent as my white classmate. That was Mississippi in the 90s. And like many children, as you can imagine, I reflected inward and started seeking value, both inside and outside of the classroom, both formal and informal. I had some amazing teachers along the way that were pivotal in my growth and development, and they absolutely were a blessing. But I remember the other boys telling me about skills that you could learn in Boy Scouts, camping, first aid, wilderness survival, orienteering, and pioneering, these things that sounded really interesting that I had no exposure to. Surely with skills like this, the other kids would have no choice but to accept me. When my mom and I showed up to the meetings, I was the only boy of color and the only one without his father. That was the first time it really hit me just how different my family was from everyone else. The Boy Scouts wasn't really for me, but I valued the skills-oriented nature of it. And I, was just interested in other stuff. You see, I was the kind of learner whose mind seemed like it was all over the place. I always had diverse interests, had a hard time sitting still, lots of energy, and like many, I was labeled a child with a variety of issues. In fact, some of the teachers just flat out told my mother that I couldn't come. Imagine if she believed them. Now, when I reached 10 years old, I became really fascinated with technology. It was a blessing to have such accomplished parents. I'm so proud of them. And since my mother worked at a hospital, I had the chance to see many different types of people with many different types of jobs. Everyone seemed to have a purpose to keep the place functioning. And it all seemed to be positively and actively playing a role in the betterment of the community. One day, a mentor, whom I still call a friend today, introduced me to a personal computer. He said to me, "Learn this, it will change the world." Boy, was he right. I'm proud to say that I got the opportunity to thank John for all those simple words, all that those simple words did for me. We didn't recognize it at the time, but he had activated something innate in me, right? This drive and interest in acquiring knowledge and picking up new skills. After that experience, I was hooked. And that year, I wrote my first lines of code. In school, my grades and progress reports said that I wasn't bright. Low grades, constant fidgeting, not being able to wait their turn. But at home, I was writing code, learning how computers talk to each other over the phone line. Sometimes it felt like I was living 2 lives. Kind of like that one line from The Matrix. In one life, I was Timothy, the not so bright kid who always had ideas and couldn't sit still. But in the other life, I lived in computers where I went by a hacker alias. No, really. But the openness of the net was sweet. No judgment, no bias, and I could learn as much as I wanted. But my two worlds didn't intentionally collide until high school, when I realized that people were willing to pay me for the computer stuff that I learned late nights in my bedroom. First, it was helping them with their coding assignments, and eventually it became building websites. I had, community of friends online that had similar interests. We frequented sites that used to provide online tests in different subjects, and you got a validated certification at the end. One of those images that comes up used to come up in the browser, and it looks like a certificate, but I mean, it's really just a JPEG. But it was a way to demonstrate our knowledge, especially since we were so young. Who'd ever believe that we knew how to code in PHP unless you'd actually done it, right? And when you see the PhD next to someone's name, it's really easy to assume that they walked a straight line to get there. Heck, they might have never even worked in their field, or they may have actually done research in a hostile environment. You really can't judge based on the appearances. Like so many, I attended community college, and then I transferred to a four-year university. I was a commuter student. I worked multiple jobs, and along the way, I had failures and experiences that taught me skills and abilities in a variety of areas. And being able to recognize the value of those lessons has made all the difference in my life. And I learned that in today's world, skills really are everything. They really mean a lot. Individuals with the right skills can find great jobs and earn family-sustaining wages, while those without skills are increasingly being left behind. To meet the needs of this new economy, this new ecosystem, employers want to be able to quickly assess the skills and identify those who have the potential to excel in their organizations. But this requires a shift away from the traditional educational practices that focus on degrees and transcripts, and towards an approach that values experiences and skills and takes advantage of micro-credentials. I believe that digital credentials are an essential part of this new approach. They provide a way for individuals to showcase their skills and achievements, and for employers to quickly identify candidates with the right skills for the job. We need a skills taxonomy, a way of baselining skills across industries. The first step in meeting the needs of this new ecosystem, if you will, is to assess the skills necessary for success. This assessment should go beyond simply looking at resumes and cover letters. Instead, we should focus on, and rather employers, for example, should focus on identifying candidates with the right skills, competencies, and experiences for the job. You have to find the right tool for the job, as my grandfather would say. There are a number of ways to do this, but one of the most effective ways is using digital credentials. Digital credentials and micro-credentials are an essential part of assessing skills for the jobs of tomorrow. They provide a way for individuals to showcase and stack their skills and achievements, and for employers to quickly identify candidates with the right skills. For example, if an employer is looking for a candidate with customer service experience, they could search for candidates who have earned the customer service micro-credential. This allows them to see not only whether or not the candidate has customer service experience, but also what level of skill they have in customer service. This makes it easier for employers to find candidates who are not only qualified for the job, but who also have the potential to excel in their role. In fact, some organizations are even beginning to use micro-credentials as a way to identify high potential employees and promote them within. This is really important. I believe that we can close the skills gap with better alignment between educators, learners, and employers. Really goes to show the value of communities like this one, coming together like this group. There's often misalignment between job seekers, what job seekers have, what educators provide, and what employers need when it comes to the resumes, the syllabi, and the job descriptions. I mean, there's that massive chasm there, right? And this creates inequitable outcomes for both learners and earners, particularly as it becomes difficult to know what skills and knowledge are necessary for each stage of the education to employment and education to entrepreneurship pipelines. In order to close the skills gap, it's essential that we work to align these three systems more closely. By doing so, we can ensure that all learners have the opportunity to develop the skills and knowledge that they need to succeed in the workforce. Additionally, we can create a more efficient system overall, making it easier for employers to find qualified candidates and reducing the number of unemployed. We hear people talk about the skills gap. Talk about it, but the skills gap is this place, right? The space between the skills that learners have and the skills that employers need. This gap often occurs because learners don't have the access to the quality information of what specific skills are even in demand by employers. And as a result, they may not be able to get the training they need to develop these in-demand skills. Alternatively, educators may not be aware of the specific skills that are required for certain jobs. I mean, that's changing all the time. And as such, they may not be able to be preparing their learners with the appropriate skills and knowledge needed to be successful in the workforce. One of the many reasons that we need multiple channels of learning. And while there are many factors that contribute to the skills gap, this lack of alignment between learners, educators, and employers is really one of the most significant. So, how do we get aligned? Well, there are a few ways. Sure, there are many ways, but here are a few that, come to mind in terms of how we might be able to align a little bit more closely. Firstly, you'll notice that all of them are quite human-centered. So something to notice about my perspective, even as a technologist. Firstly, we need to improve communication between educators and employers. Too often, we operate in silos without much communication with one another. It's essential that we break down these barriers so that educators can better understand employer needs and vice versa. One way to do this is by establishing formal, secure, and integrated channels of communication, better ways of communication. The term digital trust comes to mind. Some of you may have heard of this term before. Second, we need to increase transparency around skills, competencies, and job requirements. Another way to improve alignment between learners and employers is by increasing transparency around what specific skills and knowledge are required for certain jobs. This can be done through career pathing, which could provide clear outlines of what learners need to do in order to progress within a particular field and achieve their goals. I think that it would be really powerful for us to get to a place where a learner can approach learning with the perspective of thinking about, here's a goal that I have. I'd like to build a pathway to getting to that goal, or perhaps here's an in-demand role that I've seen. I'd like to chart a course to get to that. Or perhaps here's someone that I admire. I'd like to chart a course to being in that kind of a position. Some of the people that I admired the most were teachers, and that's what led me to becoming a professor. And then lastly, we must encourage lifelong learning. It's important we encourage it so that learners can continually skill up as their needs evolve over time. This can be done through programs like apprenticeships and other experiential learning, which provides learners with the opportunity to learn new skills on the job and outside of the job. Additionally, it's important that we make educational opportunities more accessible so that everyone has the chance to develop new skills and knowledge throughout their lifetime. It really is all hands on deck. So I came across an article just a few days ago. It had some really poignant topics in it. And there was commentary from the Coursera CEO. He was providing his thoughts on why college enrollments are declining. For the spring 2022 term, enrollments across public and private colleges in the US fell to 16.2 million. That's down 4.1% year over year. And this is according to the National Student Clearinghouse Research Center. That decline continues the trend of weakening enrollment that has been in place since before the pandemic. They mentioned three things, but the last of which is most relevant to what brings us here today. They said the third thing that was causing declining enrollments is the alternatives to learning that just didn't exist, say 5, 10 years ago. He credited the pandemic with accelerating this trend as flexible and affordable tools for learning skills and getting better paying jobs became more prevalent. Students can take a course online from big companies like IBM, Google, or Meta and potentially defer going to college. As a result, they're thinking twice about signing off on high tuition fees. He noted that a lot of students are looking at the return on investment calculation and saying, I'll start my degree online in a job training program and then have that count towards a campus-based degree program if I want to do that in a couple of years. It seems that our audience is demanding this flexibility. It's my humble opinion that we're in the early stages of a massive shift in the demand for skills. Half of all employees will need to learn new skills by 2025 as demand moves from physical to cognitive to technical and socio-emotional. And, as Gabe mentioned earlier about the automation that is happening out here, I mean, we're all seeing it. In order to stay ahead of the curve, we need to build equitable, interoperable systems that can inform and empower individuals to adapt to this changing landscape. Such systems need to be flexible and accessible so that everyone has the chance to acquire the skills that they need to succeed, so that the learner can be the masters of their destiny. Only by investing in our people can we hope to create a prosperous future for all. This shift presents an opportunity for us as a community to create a more equitable, inclusive, and resilient ecosystem of learning and value. By investing in these kinds of systems, like the systems that, sure, I'm building and others in this field around digital and micro-credentials, by investing in those kinds of systems, we'll establish and hope to establish the fundamental elements needed to ensure that learners can easily skill up as they need in the ever-changing landscape of work. Peter Senge and his colleagues coined a term, concept of a learning organization. That is an organization that facilitates learning of its members and continuously transforms itself. You see, learning organizations are resilient against the pressures of modernity. And since learning is so core to their capabilities, they're able to remain competitive and flourish. We have to become a learning society. And we can only do that by gathering in forums like this one as humans, having real conversations, and building the tools and resources and the technology necessary for a robust learning ecosystem. I invite you all to join me in supporting equitable learning experiences for all, offering micro-credentials for their achievements and empowering them every step of the way. Thank you so much for the time this morning. And it sincerely is my pleasure to be here with you today. Thanks.